Good evening. You're watching What's the Point and Why Should I Care? I'm your host, Archie Stay. Tonight's programme will look at the mining industry in the Democratic Republic of Congo and assess whether the changes to the mining industry have encouraged or prevented sustainable economic development. For this programme, we can define sustainable economic development as improving the current economic situation without jeopardising future economic potential. To give you an idea of the past events of the DRC and how they affect the current modern political and economic context, we will first run through some facts and figures about the DRC and go through a timeline of some of the key events. This video will also include a discussion of some of the theories of economic development and conflict motivation, featuring special guests, which will be used when assessing the impact the mining industry has on sustainable economic development. Overall, the growing interest and involvement by transnational mining corporations has been beneficial to the DRC, not just in economic terms, but also in the wider social developmental terms. However, this is not to say that there are not problems. All of these and many more coming up shortly. Good evening. The DRC has huge and largely untapped natural resources which, if managed appropriately, could present an effective pathway to sustainable economic development. The DRC is the largest producer of cobalt in the world, used to make high-spec alloys for products such as jet engines and gas turbines. It's also the third largest tantalum producer, also known as coltan, which is used to make capacitors in mobile phones and therefore has a very high global demand, and the seventh largest tin producer. There are large amounts of investment in the DRC, with investment in mining and infrastructure coming from both the West and China. These can be split into two categories: aid for trade and trade. Aid for trade development is aimed at developing three areas. 1. Policy formulation, both economic and trade. 2. The regulatory environment. And 3. Infrastructure. Aid for trade aims to increase a country's development by focusing on economic output and exports rather than social and human development, although they often work alongside such programs. It has drawn criticisms, however, for having an overly free trade agenda, which we will come to shortly. Trade. This can be split up into two further categories: the Chinese model and the straightforward trade model. The Chinese model exchanges mining licenses for direct investment in infrastructure, meaning that in contrast to the straightforward trade model, which exchanges capital for mining licenses, the DRC has infrastructure built for them instead of receiving money. This comes in the form of transport infrastructure, both road and rail links, and social infrastructure, hospitals and schools, etc. Both of these models are far from perfect. The regional nature of the mining industry means that monetary transactions have a greater chance of exploitation due to corruption, of which the DRC has more than its fair share, while the Chinese model has problems with the delivery and quality of the infrastructure. 1879, Belgian colonialism. Protests and killings, along with overwork, killed millions under the control of King Leopold. 1959, the Belgians lose control. 1960 to 1965, a series of coups and leadership changes resulting in the dictatorship of Joseph Mobutu. 1973 to 1974, Mobutu nationalised many foreign-owned firms and defaulted on loans, leading to economic decline and debt programme cancellation. This links to the international dependency model, which advocated this practice. In 1994 to 2003, there was civil war, with involvement from Rwandan, Zimbabwean, Ugandan and Burundian militaries, and non-state and ethnic rebel groups. In 1999, the Lusaka Peace Accord was signed, but fighting between rebel governmental forces continued. 1999 to present day, sporadic fighting continues, with groups becoming entrenched in mining areas, drawing revenues from them. There is also military complicity with illegal mining practices. Economic policies have become increasingly liberal, and amnesty given to some rebel groups helped increase investment. Also, $8 billion of debt relief from the World Bank and the IMF assisted development. Thank you for being here, Mr. Monopoly. So, is mining in the DRC good or bad?
Quite simply, most of the opposition to the mining industry are largely incoherent and ignores the evidence.
But can you tell me why mining in the DRC has been beneficial?
Very easily, very easily. The evidence is plain. The DRC has improved dramatically since the Mobutu era, and the amount of investment in the DRC has enabled them to start down the long road to development.
It is true that since the DRC abandoned its isolationist policies and nationalist policies adopted by the Mobutu, which are advocated by the international dependency theory, the economy has grown and corruption has reduced, although the corruption could be a correlation. So are you saying that the motivations behind the investment don't matter?
Exactly. As long as there is a good governance and enough regulation, the DRC can use its natural resources as a ladder to development. They are cash poor but resource rich. So by allowing foreign investments, they can play to their strengths, provided they can regulate effectively, which is a wider question, and failing to regulate are not the fault of the mining industry.
Mr. Poli, thank you for coming in. This has been most interesting. Historically, mining in the DRC has been highly exploitative, with child labour and disease commonplace. Armed factions have taken advantage of the dysfunctional economy and government to exploit their natural resources. However, as a result of UN peacekeeping and international aid, there have been some improvements. The main cause of economic development, however, has been from foreign investment in the mining industry. This is mainly because the key barriers to economic development are the lack of reliable electricity and effective transport networks. Mining companies have incentives to pay for these, as they will benefit from these as well. It's not just a zero-sum game. So to wrap up, the Congo isn't even close to being developed, but it's important to realise that development is an incremental process. But the DRC can, by allowing multinational companies access to natural resources in exchange for infrastructure or money, they can improve the working conditions for the population, create new jobs, and invest in social development programs. One final caveat to mention, though, is that there needs to be careful scrutiny of the deals made, as the potential for exploitation due to corruption remains high. I've been Archie Stay, and you've been watching What's the Point and Why Should I Care? Thank you for watching, and good night.